Welcome to the regular meeting of the Ojai Historic Preservation Commission for October 12th, 2017. Mr. Winiger, would you like to make the roll call?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Chair McCready.
Present.
Vice Chair Akins.
Here.
Commissioner Convery.
Here.
Commissioner Quinn.
Here, sorry.
Thank you. And with that, if you will rise, I'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the public wishing to address the Historic Preservation Commission on items appearing on the agenda are requested to complete a speaker's card and file it with the Secretary prior to the start of the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. Cards are available in the Council Chambers lobby. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the chair. Speakers should state their name and address for the record and must direct their comments to the chair, not the audience or press. While the Historic Preservation Commission is in session, members of the Commission, city staff, and members of the audience are expected to maintain order and decorum and to obey the orders of the chair. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Museum Representative Mark Lewis for a museum report. Hello, Mr. Lewis.
Hello, Chair McCready, Vice Chair Akins, Commissioners Quinn, Convery, and staff. We at the museum are very excited to open an exhibit this Saturday, The Art of Dennis Shives. And those of you who know Dennis, he's been here all his life. He's a self-taught artist. He's not fully been in the mainstream of professional, modern, high-powered academic art, but his stuff is fantastic. It's whimsical, it's wonderful, and it's very Ojai. And the exhibit will be opening public reception, public invited 5 to 7 this Saturday. It's a big art weekend, and we're in there in the middle of it. And the show will be up, the exhibit, through, I believe it's January 7th into January. We're also excited to say that the show that follows this will be in conjunction with the City Arts Commission. We're just coming out with a book about the architecture of Ojai. And we are going to mount a concurrent exhibit on the same subject, heavily overlapping in content, I would expect, and with a large overlay of the late, great David Mason, who contributed to that project simply by his knowledge over the years, and of course is a stalwart of the museum and of the community. Also on Ojai Day, a week from Saturday, we will, for the last time, bring back our Inventing Ojai exhibit in a booth, I believe near the fountain in Libby Park. This will not be a commercial venture, but the essence of the original meaning of Ojai Day as it began 100 years ago when Mr. Libby got things going and the name of the town was changed from Nordhoff to Ojai. Thank you.
Thank you. Minutes of the September 14th, 27 regular meeting. Are there any comments or corrections from the commissioners on those minutes? I have none.
I have none.
Grammatical errors, punctuation. Mr. Akins, did you have?
Make a motion.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Second.
Vice Chair Akins.
Yes.
Commissioner Convery.
Yes.
Chair McCready.
Yes.
Commissioner Quinn.
Abstain. I was absent.
Thank you. Motion carries.
With that, we need disclosure of site visits and ex parte contacts. That's disclosure by commissioners of site visits and ex parte contacts for items on the agenda. I visited the Nordhoff High School, Nordhoff School site and had a tour with Mr. Cantwell.
And I visited the site as well and had the tour.
I walked around the property but I was not on the tour.
I took the tour with, when it was open to the public prior to a school board meeting. I believe that was back in May. I then took the tour again this past Monday when it was conducted for members of the Historic Preservation Commission. I've also attended 2 different school board meetings, one in which I spoke as an individual, ended up answering questions, and also have met on 2 occasions with Mr. Cantwell.
Thank you. Is that everything? With that, we will move, Mr. Summers, did you?
Yes. Before we begin the consideration of item 2, I recommend taking general public comment if there is any. I believe there's at least 1 card on general public comment, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay. General public comment. Oh, Don, go ahead. We haven't done it this way before.
I think we skipped over the public comment. Dawn Titting, first I'll put on my museum hat and add on to what Mark Lewis was saying and invite the public to our 3rd Friday at 5:30. That would be next Friday. It's the night before Ojai Day. The museum is having a pre-party with events celebrating what Ojai means to me. That will run from 5:30 to 7:30 next Friday at the museum, and admission is free. Secondly, I'd like to offer to the commission, I don't know where you are with evaluating other potential properties around the city for historic significance. I know the Boyd Club has been on the radar of many for quite some time. And just in the interest of time and getting things rolling, again, it may be part of the Sarasota Master Plan. I haven't seen that for a while. But I would suggest looking at the Boyd Club as a potential historic landmark. Thank you.
Thank you. That does bring, I'm sorry for that. That does bring us to item 2. Mr. Winiger?
Yes, thank you, and Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is your consideration of the historic landmark designation for the Ojai or Nordhoff Grammar School, which is located at 414 East Ojai Avenue, as a possible Ojai City landmark. This matter has been referred back to the Historic Preservation Commission due to errors that were made in the noticing of the hearings for the previous consideration by the Historic Preservation Commission. I'd like at this time to ask the city attorney to address the issue of notice as well as other procedural issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners, Mr. Winiger. Couple of points. First, the Historic Preservation Code, rather the ordinance, requires that tonight's hearing before this commission be at a public hearing, a notice public hearing, with 10 days notice. That requirement is set in 4808 and 4805. That requirement has been met. In particular, notice was provided in the following ways. Certified and regular mailed notice to the Ojai Unified School District as the property owner, at least 10 days before the hearing. Regular mail notice to all property owners within 300 feet of the Chaparral School property, also sent at least 10 days before the hearing. Publication of the public hearing notice in the Ojai Valley News on Friday, September 29th, more than 10 days before the hearing. And an additional courtesy personal notice by email from Mr. McClary, City Manager, to Mr. Cantwell, OUSD Superintendent, on September 25th, 2017. Mr. Cantwell has confirmed by email to Mr. McClary dated Thursday, September 28th, 2017, that the school district did receive the notice. So the hearing is properly noticed and is ready for your consideration of the proposed landmark. Additionally, as you'll be familiar with, 4806 requires a nomination form for a proposed landmark. The nomination form has been prepared and is in the packet tonight. The nomination form was begun on September 6th by Mr. Winiger, was completed on September 29th by Mr. Winiger. The date, the stamped date, received date, is in error. It was received by Ms. Herbrook on September 29th, not the 9th. The wheels of the stamp had not been advanced, but nonetheless, it was received on the 29th. That receipt is fully in compliance with the code because the code, in particular 4808, requires that this hearing before this commission be held within 90 days of receipt of a completed nomination form. The form was received complete by the Community Development Department on the 29th. This is within 90 days of that date. Nothing in the code, nothing in 4808, nothing in 4806, and nothing in 4805 in any way require that the hearing notices not be issued until after the nomination form is prepared or completed. The timing of the notices and the timing of the nomination form are independent. The requirement is solely that a form be prepared before the hearing and that the hearing be held within 90 days of the receipt of the completed form. Both of those requirements have been met. The matter is thus fully properly before this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Has the wheel on the stamper been repaired?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so again, Mr. Summers, the document that we have that's towards the back of our packet, that's where it says September 6th and then September 9th. That's the document you're talking about, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's attachment D.
Yeah, it's way in the back.
Towards the back of the packet. And the date towards the top, that's the 9th should be later. But nonetheless, it complies with the code. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Winiger?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Historic Preservation Commission is very familiar with this process concerning this property. In 2015, the commission requested and the city council granted funding for 2 historic preservation surveys, both for the building we're in, the Smith-Hobson House, as well as for property which is known variously as Chaparral School, Ojai, or Nordhoff Grammar School, the current offices of the Ojai Unified School District, which are located at 414 East Ojai Avenue. The Historic Preservation Commission considered this survey, historic resource survey, on 2 previous occasions. The survey indicated, the original draft of the survey indicated that the auditorium structure on the site would be eligible for possible consideration on the California register, but that the rest of the property, or the buildings, I should say, from the original school had been altered in such a way that they were eligible just for local landmark designation. At that time, testimony indicated that to another structure on the property, the so-called kindergarten structures, which were built in 1953, also might have merit due to the technology, architectural technology that was employed, as well as the pedigree of the architect that was involved in that addition. So an addendum was prepared, that is attachment C of your staff report, that found that that structure employs technology known as the Ojai section, which was an innovation by Maynard Linden, the architect for both that structure as well as other schools in the district. So, in sum, the Historic Resource Survey found that both the original structure, or the Mission Revival structure that contains both the Chaparral School and the offices and the auditorium meets several of the criteria expressed in the city ordinance concerning designation of historic resources, as did the addition, the kindergarten room. So based on that conclusions and findings, the Historic Preservation Commission made a recommendation to City Council to designate this as a city landmark. We have reviewed the information in the report. Once again, we do agree that there are typographical errors and editorial errors that need to be changed. But other than that, we find that the information provided justifies your reconsideration and recommendation to the City Council for the designation of the of the landmark, rather. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that members of the Commission may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Winiger?
I do have a question. So when we talked about the two locations that were going to be landmarked, one was the Smith Hobson House, and when we talked about it in the meeting, we talked about some potential limitations and the need to possibly have to go to the City Council, ask for money in order to do a addendum to the Historical Resources Report to talk about the land. The same thing took, so when we considered the Chaparral School, again, we talked about it, ended up, we felt like being under the same constraints of not being able to, well, actually, we're talking about it now, but we talked last month about whether the not landmarking the land or landmarking the land, you know, what was the importance of that. So what I'm getting at is we had the instructions a month ago to not, that by not having a report for the land, we were limited in what we could landmark. So we put forth a motion, passed 3-2 to the City Council, stipulating that the landmark covered the buildings, not necessarily the land, and that we would then ask the City Council for more money. However, in not knowing legally how that sets any kind of precedent to this meeting, Tuesday night in the discussion with the City Council regarding the Smith Hobson property, by a vote of 3-2, the City Council went ahead and landmarked the buildings, or the home, the buildings, and the property in their whole. And so my question is, does that affect tonight? Are we still under the same instructions that we had a month ago? Are we in amended instructions, or just what exactly are the guidelines?
Mr. Chair,
Is this in sequence, or are we out of sequence here?
No, I think it's an appropriate question.
Yeah, question to staff.
Yes. In both cases, the scope of work for both historic resource surveys was limited to the structures, the primary principal structures. In this case, in the case of Smith Hobson, the City Hall building. In the case of the school, it was the Mission Revival school buildings themselves. The addendum expanded the scope. It did not take into consideration any auxiliary buildings on the property, such as the maintenance buildings or what have you. And there are other facilities on the property itself that are not actually even related to the school activity. So that is an issue that is still worthy of consideration.
Thank you.
Maybe an additional comment or two on that. Thank you. One key point to bear in mind in comparing the proposed landmark designation for Chaparral School and the City Council approved landmark designation for the building in which we sit is that the council was landmarking its own property. The matter under consideration tonight is an independent property owner's property. So the standard is the same as set in the code, but it adds an additional consideration for the council when they're evaluating the designated landmark of here. As you'll recall from Tuesday, or those who haven't attended can watch it on the website, that point was a matter of some debate among the council, and in the end, the majority voted to find that there was sufficient evidence that supported the designation of the entirety of this estate, minus the help of Ojai building, as worthy of preservation as a landmark meeting the various criteria. That designation is further supported by the fact that the council is intimately familiar with the historical features of this property, given that it is the owner of this property, or owns it in trust for the public. Here, we would want to ensure that there's sufficient evidence in the record to support any recommended designation by this commission to the council of all, some, or a portion of the Chaparral School property.
Thank you.
Can I
With
just-
that, I'll open it up to the public comment period. Mr. Cantwell?
Am I going first in public comment or after as a
Uh,
property owner?
I thought you wanted to speak first.
I'll do whatever you prefer.
Thank you.
Again, I just wanted to make sure I have a little more time than the 3 minutes for public comment.
I'm sorry, you are presenter for the school district, so you have as much time as you would like.
Thank you. I do have copies of letter that was prepared for you guys. Should be copies for you as well. And might have enough actually for everyone here. You want to take one and pass them down?
We only have 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. 4 total, or you?
4 total.
Sorry, let me get 2 more. Sorry about that. So while that's getting handed out, my name is Andy Cantwell, superintendent for the school district. Live at 214 Valley Rio, but again, representing the school district here today. Thank you, commissioners, for the opportunity to speak to you tonight, and thank you for all your service and commitment to this community. Before I actually get into the memo itself, I do have both an admission and acknowledgement. The admission is, about 3 months ago, I did not know anything about historic preservation and frankly knew very little about that site where I work. And so over the course of the past 3 months, I've spent scores of hours both researching our historic preservation code as well as learning a lot more about that property. I'm really thankful, even more so, to be able to work in that location and knowing its rich history. So that's my admission. I feel like I've gone, feet deep perhaps into this whole topic of historic preservation, but the reality is probably only a few inches, really. I've had a chance to watch a number of your videos and having a chance to speak with each of you or many of you, both Monday night and previously. I realize that whereas I'm only a few inches deep on this, you guys are miles deep with your experience and knowledge. And so my acknowledgement is to you with your experience, as well as understanding that anything I say tonight, I don't intend to be educating you on either the code or on our position, but I appreciate the opportunity to present the district's position on this issue nonetheless. With that, I am going to go into the memo. It's 9 pages, so unless you desire me to, I was not intending to read the entire thing, but I do want it in the public record, and so if you'd like me to read the entire thing for that purpose, I can.
Please go ahead.
Go ahead with reading it? Okay, sure thing.
If you need to, yes.
So the district respectfully requests that the City of Ojai Historic Preservation Commission not recommend for historic landmark designation the school district office and Chaparral High School property located at 414 East Ojai Avenue. The property has tremendous sentimental value to many in the valley. The school board and district administration take very seriously the responsibility to steward the property and all district resources for the benefit of the community now and for future generations. The district has no plans currently to materially alter the property. Our request to you is based on 2 premises. The first, that the Phase 1 Historic Resource Inventory Report and the accompanying staff report and resolution do not sufficiently evidence that the required criteria have been met. And 2, regardless of your level of agreement with that premise 1, we request that the timing of this deliberation be delayed until which time formal proposals have actually been received to the district, so that way the community can understand what trade-offs may or may not be necessary in terms of development options with the property and the historic preservation of some of the buildings. So the first section I'll begin on as far as the insufficiency of the materials presented. Chapter 8 of Article 4 of the Ojai Municipal Code states the procedural due process rights for property owners and provides the 11 criteria by which a property will be judged on whether it merits designation. The district believes the materials in the public agenda packet released this past Friday do not evidence that the property satisfies the criteria on a substantive level and also fails to satisfy the procedural requirements. I'd like to focus on the substance for now. As you know, Section 4807 of the Culture and Historical Preservation Law states that the following criteria for consideration of nomination. I won't read that because I know you're very familiar with it. I'll just draw your attention to Section H, which I believe to be the first and most crucial element that we want to highlight as a district. This memorandum will discuss concerns from the Provenience Group report and city staff materials related to a number of these criteria, but as I stated, the most significant concern relates to satisfaction of criterion H. Section 4-807H, in important part, the sufficient integrity of location, design, materials, and workmanship. Pursuant to the language in the municipal code, any structure, property, or area that meets one or more of criteria A through G shall also have this. So I know that the wording itself states that properties only need to meet one of the 11 criteria, but within the actual criteria themselves, it's stated that they actually must meet one plus this one. A property being recommended for designation must satisfy the requirement to have sufficient integrity of all four aspects of integrity in addition to other criteria. The local Ojai standard differs from the standard for national and state registries in that the national and state registries add 3 additional aspects of integrity that must be met: setting, feeling, and association. Therefore, the local code is less strenuous than the federal and state in the sense that it does not carry those 3 factors, but only in the extent to which that it does not require, again, integrity of setting, feeling, and appreciation. Otherwise, the Ojai Code identifies the same 4 factors that must be met: integrity of location, design, materials, and workmanship. In the city staff administrative report, staff correctly identifies that the report determined that all elements other than the auditorium structure have been modified to an extent that compromise the historical integrity. That's page 2 of 3 of the administrative report. The Provenience Group failed to capture the full extent of changes that have taken place at the property. For example, the report incorrectly states that the U-shaped buildings all have terracotta tile roofs, despite the entire Chaparral High School wing and the special education wing having those original terracotta tile roofs being replaced with asphalt shingle. Discussion on that and some other corrections to the report are later in this memorandum. Yet it still made the following conclusion regarding integrity. With the exception of the Chaparral Auditorium, modifications over time compromise the integrity of the contiguous complex. I'll skip to the next bullet point. Unlike the rest of the complex, the Chaparral Auditorium still retains much of the original character-defining features original to the building. Going to the next bullet point. The Office of Historic Preservation and National Park Service guidelines indicate that design, workmanship, feeling, and materials, and my editorial comment was that 3 of these 4 elements are the same that are in your local code. Are the same criteria, or are the most critical integrity elements for historical buildings. As a whole, the contiguous school complex does not maintain sufficient integrity required to qualify it for the listing on the National Register or California Register due to modifications. In particular, the following incompatible alterations were noted. On page 30, it then goes into an extensive list of alterations that have been made. And then going to the kindergarten addendum, the report states, although entry and small foyer addition were constructed in the 90s, the architecture is simplistic, and the 2, and Darwin, I know that you know how to say this word, and I don't. What's the?
Clear story.
Thank you, clear story. Windows do not negatively impact the building design. However, the roof-mounted air conditioning units do detract from the aesthetic design. The south elevation of Classroom 1 features an enclosed room addition at the west end of the terrace with walls composed of plywood siding and aluminum-framed horizontal slider windows and a flush door. I found her commentary here especially interesting. It clearly demonstrates an unsympathetic use of materials. However, the formal metal louvers have been replaced with translucent light panels suspended from a ceiling grid, probably swapped out at the same time the original skylights over the restroom were also replaced with acrylic dome skylights. The building does not maintain sufficient integrity required to qualify it for listing in the National Register due to specific incompatible alterations within, again, modifications listed. Despite these conclusions drawn throughout the report, the final conclusion stated for satisfying the municipal code requirement for sufficient integrity of location, design, materials, and workmanship. This is her actual conclusion. Although Nordhoff Grammar School does not retain a sufficient integrity of design, materials, and workmanship that would qualify it for the National Register or California Register, it continues to convey its overall plan and architectural design, so it is worthy of preservation. In particular, restoration of the original belfry using the Secretary of Interior standard of rehabilitation would be worthy of restoration. However, note that what she identifies as worthy of restoration is something that does not have sufficient integrity of material that's no longer present. However, nothing in the Ojai Municipal Code differentiates the standard from the state or federal requirements as it relates to design, materials, and workmanship. The distinction between the federal and local standards is as it relates to 3 additional integrity factors the federal law requires. The local requirement does not state conveying the overall plan and architectural design as sufficient evidence of integrity. While the Provenience Group's report missed a number of additional alterations to the property, the report details numerous changes to the building and the property, yet it draws an unsupported conclusion, which even if it were supported, I'm not confident actually meets the sufficient integrity of those 4 categories. So now I'm going to actually do a little bit quicker review of the initial A through G criteria that are listed. And my concern with each of these are not whether or not she's making a truthful statement, but the extent to which it actually satisfies the criteria listed. And here's an example with 4-807B. Its identification with the person or persons who significantly contributed to the community. The report offers Miss Ethel Percy Andrews as the person associated with the school, despite stating in the report that there was no evidence found that Miss Andrews ever visited this property. The report conjectures that she may have sent tutors to the school, again, despite stating that no evidence was found establishing that fact. Even if it were true that Miss Andrews sent tutors from the retirement facility she operated, then does that meet the requirements of the criterion that the property be identified with her? Criterion C. Its embodiment of distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style valuable for the study of a period, type, method of construction, or use of indigenous materials. The explanation in the historic report for this criterion being met was, this is a quote from the report, the rationale provided. Some of the features of the school complex reflect the same Spanish Revival design elements which function to aesthetically unify the community. This explanation is unresponsive to the statutory prompt of whether or not its embodiment of distinguishing characteristics of an architectural style are valuable for study. Whether some design elements function to unify the community, that does not answer or provide evidence that the distinguishing characteristics are valuable of study. Again, regardless of whether or not the statement is accurate, it just doesn't seem quite related to satisfying that criterion. Going to criterion E, which is its embodiment of elements of design, materials, or craftsmanship that render it architecturally significant. The report's explanation of how this criterion is met is to explain that there have been many changes to the property. However, Nordhoff Grammar School retains some of the Spanish Revival architectural styling that infuses the community as a whole. Again, retaining some styling that infuses the community is not sufficient grounds to meet a criterion which is focused on how the specific elements of design, detailing, materials, or craftsmanship render architecturally significant. F, its embodiment of design elements that make it structurally or architecturally innovative. The report states this criterion is met because the use of an arcade is an innovation seen throughout the Ojai downtown. Having a similar design style to other neighboring areas is not sufficient rationale that the property itself is innovative. This property was not the first to use an arcade in Ojai, nor is it the first within a school property. Stating that the squared arcade on a single building within the property unifies it with the rounded arcade in other parts of the downtown, once again, I believe to be as unresponsive to the criterion requirement. Criterion G. Its unique location or singular physical characteristics that make it an established or familiar visual feature. The report concludes this criterion is met because the building has been in the same location for 90 years. And again, this is where I do actually need to defer to your knowledge on this topic more so than mine. However, the answer seems to beg the question. To state the fact that the building has been located for 90 years and that they have remained in the same location suggests that any building of this age that has not been moved would meet the criterion. This does not seem to be a natural reading of the code. All property has a unique location in the sense that it cannot be in 2 places at once. However, that does not appear to be meaning the term unique in this section of the code. Reading the first 7 words together, its unique location or singular physical characteristics seem to suggest that this criterion is focused on properties unique in the sense of being distinct and unlike anything else, not that it's simply been the same location for a period of time. So now that was my substantive disagreement with the report, but I'd also like to talk about procedural concern for why this property should not be designated tonight. Section 4-808 of the Municipal Code requires that within 90 days from receipt of a completed nomination in proper form, the HPC shall hold a public hearing and adopt by resolution a recommendation on the nominated landmark. It states that the resolution shall be accompanied by a report to the City Council containing, among other requirements, the following, and once again, I won't read those because I know you're familiar with them. However, they are extensive in what they require. I will point out in criterion H, it states, a map showing the location of the nominated landmark and the boundaries of the nominated historic district. The recommendations and report of the Historic Preservation Commission shall be sent to the City Council and affected property owners within 7 days following the vote on the resolution and shall be available to the public. So again, everything listed in 808 with regard to what must be in that report must come to the property owner within 7 days of when the resolution is adopted. Please note that the above listed items C through J are altogether lacking from the current report accompanying your resolution. Each must be explicitly stated in the report. The district brought this issue to the city manager on August 31st. On October 3rd, the district received a response to this stated concern from the city manager. The response included, the city expects that if the Historic Preservation Commission votes to recommend a proposed landmark designation of all or a portion of the Chaparral School property, then the full report and recommendation resolution that would come from the Historic Preservation Commission to the City Council would contain all elements specified in this section. I disagree with the position of the city that this report requirement in the section is not required to be presented to you at the time the commission is prepared to act on resolution. However, even assuming that the city's position is accurate and this report was not required to come to you tonight, then the section I just read, 4-808H, clearly states that that report must come to us within 7 days of when you adopt your resolution. And my concern is that if you do not have a special meeting called, the HPC will not have the opportunity prior to next Thursday when that report will be completed and submitted to the district. The requirements for the report, which must accompany a resolution, has elements that are primarily procedural, like giving us our notice of appeal and also an interim prohibition. But there's also truly substantive things in there, like clearly identifying which aspects of the property are noted for its that's important architectural detail, as well as what potential other uses might be able to take place on that property that don't require a work permit. There's nothing in this report that currently states that. The next section of my memo discusses corrections and clarifications to the resolution and to the Provenience Group report. With regard to the resolution, that all crucial criteria H, which I discussed earlier, the resolution currently references a residence. I'm not aware of a current or prior residence on the district office property, so I'm not sure which building that's referring to.
I think that's an error.
Page 3, Section 1 of the resolution states the Historic Preservation Commission hereby recommends to the City Council that the building known as the Nordhoff Grammar School then proceeds. I don't know which building this is specifically referring to. This is a singular building. Is this the auditorium or some other building, the building that formerly housed the Belfry? On page 4 of the resolution, first sentence as well as throughout, the Spanish Revival, also known as Spanish Eclectic style school property, consists of a modified U-shaped configuration of one-story buildings adjoined by an arcade and topped with a low-pitched terracotta tiled roof. 10 of the 13 former classroom buildings no longer have that terracotta roof, that terracotta tile. It's correct that all roofs originally shared that tile, but significant modifications have taken place to, again, now 10 of the 13 classrooms actually have the asphalt shingle. Page 4 in the feature section, other character-defining features include generous expanses of wood, multi-pane double-hung windows. The majority of these windows have been replaced. The only building that may still have these windows are the auditorium and the rectangular-shaped main building with the truncated tower. Now proceeding to the actual report itself. Below, please find detailed my concerns from the Provenience Group report. I reached out to the Provenience Group repeatedly since mid-August, but I did not receive a response to any of these questions or clarifications. I did speak on September 1st. I did receive an email, I should say, from the Provenience Group requesting that I provide page and paragraph numbers for my clarifications, concerns, or questions, so I have provided them to you in that requested format. However, when I provide them to her, I have not received a response. Clarification page, or clarification question. Once again, I bring up the link to Ethel Percy Andrews, but I'm confused by the link because her own report states there was no evidence establishing one. Another clarification question, page 7. The report completed an excellent analysis of the federal and state standards on pages 5 through 7, including the explanation that in addition to meeting one of the multiple criteria, the property must maintain integrity. The report explains the requirements separately for federal and state. However, there's no mention of the similar requirement embedded within criteria H of the local code. This was just a request for her, would it be possible for the report to include a similar explanation in section 3.3, since it was done for sections 3.1 and 3.2, the federal and the state standards for sufficiency of integrity. Just an editorial note on page 14, paragraph 2, she begins using the Ojai Valley School District office, and I just wanted to correct the name of the district, Ojai Unified. She does that throughout the report, switching back and forth with adding Valley. Clarification request, pages 19 through 20. The discussion around the use of WPA funds is very interesting, and it sounds quite possible that the funds were used. However, it does not sound like evidence was found to prove that the funding actually came through. There's a lot of mention of documents leading up to when the funding was to come. And so if we don't have evidence of the funding coming, then perhaps it should be stated, that this was possibly or probably even a WPA project, but not asserted as a fact. If it is a fact that the funding did come through, then perhaps we could just make it a little bit more explicit in what's actually stated in the report. Just a personal commentary note for page 25. I noted the changes in the building that she featured in her figure 16. The metal windows to the right have been replaced since the picture, but older pictures show those windows didn't exist at all. Installation of AC window unit, and then also additions of the steps that were previously in the picture are now a ramp. And also we've added other hardscape features to the actual exterior. Another edit, page 27, paragraph 2, she states the property consists of a modified U-shaped configuration of one-story buildings. This is once again the same comment regarding the inaccuracy of that statement, or at least the confusion that could create by saying that all of the U-shaped buildings still possess those roofs. Clarification question on page 27, paragraph 3. Other character-defining features include generous expanses of wood multi-pane double-hung windows. These features were originally character-defining, but the report states in the very following paragraph that windows differ quite a bit and vary greatly. It does not seem that the windows continue to be character-defining if they differ quite a bit and vary greatly. Additional information, I was giving her a note of additional information. She referenced bonds in the past, and I wanted to let her know the more recent bonds the district has had. An editorial note for page 28, or just an edit, I should say, for page 28, paragraph 2. The decorative tiles at the Chaparral Auditorium are brand new. She references that as a historical element worthy of preserving. Those were actually installed in April of 2017. Page 30 also mentions the decorative tiling at the auditorium. I'm actually going to skip over my feedback on the addendum because I know that at this point I've I think sufficiently established my concerns. What I want to move to is the request for a delay to making a decision. As a public school district utilizing the property for instructional purposes, the property is not currently subject to local building codes or requirements that would be imposed under local designation or landmark designation. If the district continues to utilize the property in a similar manner, then the impact of landmarking is moot. Therefore, if the commission does not adopt the resolution this evening, the district requests that you not return this issue to your agenda until the district has formally received responses to a request for proposals for possible development on the site, because only then does this determination actually have legal ramification for the district, to my knowledge. During a joint session meeting with the City Council on October 3rd, the district detailed the timeline and process for advertising an RFP, receiving a response, public involvement in considering the responses, and a possible 12 to 24-month period of due diligence by the possible lessee to secure entitlements, test the condition of the buildings and the soil, etc. The Historic Preservation Commission will have ample opportunity to participate in this process at a later time. There's nothing that's going to be rushed by the school board or the district. If development proposals for the site are received, the district looks forward to many public hearings and opportunities for stakeholders to provide feedback on the merits of the proposal. It is the district's desire to cast as wide a net as possible to solicit proposals, meaning that we desire to provide few restrictions in the RFP. So that way, the school district community can have options to choose between and understand the trade-offs between proposals. For instance, one proposal might generate twice the revenue but require modification to one of these buildings. Another one might bring little revenue but might have expansive affordable housing. Rather than us begin restricting possible concepts from coming forward, we believe it is in the community's best interest to impose few restrictions for response and have a community-wide conversation about our priorities and what we are willing to sacrifice once we actually have something on the table, once we have development offers present. So in conclusion, the district disagrees with landmarking the property at this time. The report the Provenience Group provided and accompanying city materials are insufficient to substantively establish that the criteria for nomination have been met, and procedurally fails to include crucial information in the report accompanying the resolution. Separate from the substantive and procedural concerns, the district simply respectfully asks from one public body serving the Ojai Valley to another to please refrain from landmarking prior to when the district receives formal responses from developers for possible alternative uses for the property. I'm available for any questions, but thank you for the opportunity to read this and share my thoughts with you.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have questions at this time for Mr. Cantwell? If not, I'll proceed to the public comment period.
Well,
Commissioner Convery?
I have comments about some of the statements that were made here. They're pretty detailed, and I would maybe be better to go through the comments coming forward to see if it brings up more information about that.
Public comment period, you mean?
Yeah, but I
Yes.
do have a number of comments about this report for later.
Okay. I agree. I think I'd like to move on to the public comment period and open it up.
Great,
We
thank
may
you.
want to come back to you, Mr. Cantwell.
Sure thing.
Thank you so much for your detailed response. And
Sorry, it was 9 pages.
No, not at all, and thank you so much for your time the other night. It was late, and you were thorough in your tour, and we appreciate that.
Absolutely, thank you.
With that, I will open the public comment period. Craig Walker.
Good afternoon. Excuse me, I've had a cold. I'm here this afternoon to speak in favor of landmarking the Nordhoff Grammar School property. The property is clearly historic. First, its historic significance is described in many books and articles tracing the development of our community. It has been on the Sites of Merit list for the city of Ojai for several years. Second, the independent consultant hired by the city has determined that it meets the city's landmark criteria and has recommended landmarking the property. Third, you have already made a strong recommendation for landmark status yourself. The proposal is back before you tonight because an oversight prevented the school district from commenting. I hope you will consider the school district's input, but I also hope you will not overlook the importance of protecting these buildings for the benefits of the current and future generations. And I'd like to just make a couple of comments. I think there's some confusion about what it means to landmark the property, because you have a property that has a historic structure on it. And the report and the resolution clearly point out what those historic buildings are. The buildings that were designed by Maynard Linden and by Roy Wilson. Those are the buildings that are under consideration here. None of the other buildings have been looked at. The gas pumps, the sheds, the loading docks, The offices, some of the offices in the back, none of those have been, anyone has even suggested that those should be included as something that need to be protected. However, the land it's the property of these buildings, and therefore it becomes part of the landmarking, but only to the extent that any changes to that property that are made need to be considered by this commission. So in other words, there's nothing in the landscaping. There's some properties that you landmark where the landscaping is very historic and you call that out as part of the protections. But in this case, that's not so. So the skate park, all of that completely falls outside of the landmark protections that you're giving to those buildings. However, if the school district did come along and want to build a 4-story building right in the courtyard there, then you would want to be able to review its impact, because the law says that changes to the property should be compatible with the landmark, and it shouldn't detract from the historic significance of the buildings that you've protected. So I think there's a little bit of confusion in that you're not actually protecting any of the landscaping or any of the outbuildings, but you are saying that the property on which it is located should be reviewed in case there's some other thing. And it doesn't even mean that they can't build anything new. You just had a case where the Libby House, they wanted to build another home on that property, and they built something they designed something compatible with the historic structure, and you approved it. So there's no reason that this should be seen as prohibitive. Another point I wanted to make was that Mr. Cantwell gave a very detailed description of his objections to the language in the report. And there were some questions that I had as well, I must say, in the way the language was. Some of it I felt they kind of used boilerplate, and they maybe didn't go through it clearly and clean it up. But the one thing that he hit a lot was that the integrity of the buildings does not qualify it for the state or the national register. And I just want to point out that those are very high bars. You know, you have your local landmarks that mean something to the local people, and then you have these high bars for landmarks and the integrity. They really need to be pristine examples of what they're trying to convey. Basically, integrity doesn't mean that it's exactly the same. It just means that it conveys its historic significance. And as one who went to school in those buildings back in the 1950s, which wasn't that long after it had been built, 20 years or so, I could tell you that those buildings still convey the historic nature of what they were intended to be. Within the local context, somebody from the state Historic Preservation Office may feel that it doesn't make the cut, and I think that's what this person was trying to point out from Prevenience Group. But with the exception of the auditorium and the other, the kindergarten building. I just had one more thing I wanted to mention. Yes, I remember I went to the combined meeting between the district and the school district and the city, and at that meeting the school district kept asking the city council members, well, tell us what you would like to see on this property. How would you like to see this property used, and what kind of considerations would you like to have there? And I think that this landmarking question is one step towards providing that answer. Right? Because the city is trying to decide whether what it wants to see is historic preservation of those buildings there on the property. So anyway, I urge you to landmark those buildings. Thank you, or to recommend it.
Thank you. Bill Miley?
Hello. For the record, my name is Bill Miley, and I live in Ojai. And I also took the public tour. So tonight, you are again reproposing that 414 East Ojai Avenue become a city historical landmark. And as I understand the dynamics of this community discussion, which has been going on, the school trustees and others are reluctant to agree because of their fiscal crisis and need for a new and sufficient revenue stream. And my position, which I'm going to detail, historical landmarking, in my opinion, is not appropriate. So, landmarking will create obstacles for development of revenue streams from this property. Of the state legal criteria you use to establish potential landmarking, the last one on the list is letter K, and I find it ambiguous. It says landmarking should not infringe on the rights of the private owner. Your commission's analysis of the criteria, and I quote, was this, quote, "The property's designation will not infringe on the rights of a private owner since the owner of the property is a public agency." So my interpretation of that is, so you say it will not apply as the owner is a government agency, in this case the school district, so public is not private. I assume you are implying it's okay to infringe on a public owner's right, just not a private owner's right. The taxpayers, in my opinion, the taxpayers are behind the school district, are in effect the owners, ultimately considered, in my opinion, private owners. So your decision says it's okay to impinge on taxpayer rights. And I don't agree with that at all. Okay. The school district is a slow-moving crisis. They have declining enrollment due to high housing costs. They have revenue needs that can't be met through their regular sources and are thus looking for assets which can be monetized. Your commission has a category, sites of merit, which has already been referenced, which designates structures which may in the future merit historical landmarking. And now I know that this site is on the list, and it would be a good place to keep it. That's a good option. The elected school trustees have a legal fiduciary responsibility to their constituents for providing a viable educational world. That's their world. Your commission's world is the historic structures within the city, and now as of Tuesday, 23. Before last Tuesday, they numbered 22. And in looking over them all 22, none of them have had or have a legal community responsibility to be carried out, which the school district does. Now, the post office is there, but that's a county landmark, okay? But there is one, maybe, and it's number 10, and that's the Nordorf Cemetery, okay? Obviously, the Ojai Unified School District does have a huge legal responsibility, a community responsibility. And in addition, the pending commission decision, if you say yes, will have an impact on a larger population than the city's population. And those are the people that live outside the district, outside the city, but within the school district boundaries. So if you landmark the site, it will directly affect thousands of citizens outside the city. So in summary, if the school board trustees say not now, which I hear they are saying, your commission should, in my opinion, accept that. Please listen to the school trustees. Please look at the big picture. Financially, the city has a budget of about $11 million. The school district's budget is $25 million. Again, please look at the bigger picture and vote to rescind the pending designation, or just don't vote for it, and keep it on the sites of merit list. But all is not lost. It's important to remember that when any plans come before the Planning Commission for review of any proposed development, that the commission's suggestions and recommendations can guarantee that historic features will be retained. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Steve Weed?
Wow, some new faces that I don't usually have a chance to talk to. Most of you I don't know. My name is Steve Weed. My family and I have lived in Ojai for 7 years. It's my first time speaking to this meeting. I'm blown away with the amount of detail that happens in not only this meeting, but the Planning Commission meeting and the other meetings that the city commissions do. I'm going to try and be brief since I don't have the wealth of knowledge on this issue. To me, it's not a legal issue. It's not a zoning issue. It's really more of a cultural issue, and I'm sure that you would agree with that. What I see in Ojai is that our demographics have changed. We've become an older and older population, and yet there's still a tremendous amount of people that have lived in Ojai most of their years, be that 50 or 70 or 80 years, whatever the case is. And there's a lot of strong memories for the things that happen in Ojai. And I know as you get older, as I have, that certain things take on sentimental value. The particular property in question did not qualify for state or national historic measures, and I know the city can adopt other measures to list particular properties. And so at face value, I think to myself, gosh, we didn't sign the armistice in the Ojai Elementary School property, and the Chumash were not massacred there. And to me, in terms of groundbreaking historic value, it does have some value. I understand, the first time that I went in the auditorium, I says, damn, why aren't we using this thing? We could have country dances here every day. This is a great property. And, my kids have gone over and touched the bell that sits in the front of the courtyard. So I realize that there are some things that tie that property to the community. But as I listened to Mr. Cantwell talk about the language in the local measure, I thought, it doesn't really fit. My perspective is simply this. I haven't been here all my life, and so I don't have the roots that many of the people in this community do to that property. I've been in school board meetings where I've heard people from the community talk about going to school in the boardroom, and I get that, okay? My traditions are not from Southern California. I grew up in the Seattle area. My grandmother was a school teacher, typical traditional spinster school teacher. And I respect that there is a 3-minute limit, but I know that other speakers have gone over that, so it asks for your indulgence. I will just be another minute. Okay? So, she taught my father. And at that point, the school building, I don't even remember what it was, because I went to that elementary school too, and it was a little different. The property that my family built on was in that same neighborhood. It was family property. We came into some money, and my grandmother gave the property to my father. When we went to build our little 3-bedroom Rambler, one of the original family homes was there. It was a log cabin. I kid you not. And they watched my father deconstruct that so we could build our property there. I'm sure that both that school property and the property that I grew up on are much different today. Okay? Both of those places had sentimental value to me. But the reality of it is that someone coming from Los Angeles or Baltimore or wherever, sending their kids to that school, it would be a school for public education. The value that it would have to those children is the teachers that taught them, the lessons that they learned there. It would not be the physical structure. I really appreciate Mr. Cantwell's comments in including not only the Historic Preservation Board, but the council and every member of the community in ongoing discussions about appropriate use for that. And I'll guarantee you, with as many people that we have that grew up in this community, with this commission and the other commissions, nobody's going to do anything crazy on that property. So I would encourage you to breathe a little bit, to give it some time and let the process work so that we get an appropriate use for that property.
Thank you, Mr. Miley. Don Theding? Thank you.
Good evening, Don Teeting. Thank you for your work as stewards of Ojai's history and our heritage. The Nordhoff Grammar School is not a small piece of Ojai history. It sits on 7.5 acres in the middle of our small town. The building was designed by preeminent architect Roy Wilson, who also designed a number of other buildings in town, including Bill Baker's Bakery, which is now a zoo, and sits directly across the street from the downtown grammar school. These buildings are an integral part of downtown's historic landscape and make Ojai, Ojai. The Nordhoff Grammar School's roots run deep. The building has stood for 90 years. Its significance within the context of the Union High School District is described in Walter Bristol's 1946 book, The Story of the Ojai Valley, reprints which can be viewed under the public secondary post on the OhioHistory.com website, and the Ojai Valley Museum edition of the Ojai Valley, an illustrated history book. The buildings and its surroundings are a featured stop on the Ojai Valley Museum Saturday morning guided Ojai historical walking tour. The record supports landmark status for the Nordhoff Grammar School. The Historic Preservation Commission previously identified the structures as historic sites of merit. A historic resources inventory and evaluation prepared by a qualified expert found the school eligible for the listing as a City of Ojai historic landmark. The Chaparral Auditorium was determined eligible for both the City of Ojai historic landmark and the California Register of Historical Places. Additionally, a letter by Ojai historian David M. Miller Mason supports landmarking status and was submitted to you on June 8, 2017. A copy of the letter is attached to this memo, and I would like the opportunity to read the letter into the record at the end of my statement.
Please do.
Why landmark the Nordhoff Grammar School now? The National Trust for Historic Preservation website states, there is no chance to renovate or to save a historic site once it's gone, and we can never be certain what will be valued in the future. This reality brings to light the importance of locating and saving buildings of historic significance, because once a piece of history is destroyed, it is lost forever. Experts have agreed that the Nordhoff Grammar School is a building of historic significance and is eligible for listing as a City of Ojai historic landmark. Please ensure that it remains part of our history and our heritage for the community, for our visitors, and for future generations. I urge you to vote yes to nominate Nordhoff Grammar School as a City of Ojai historic landmark number 24. And with your permission, I'd like to read Mr. Mason's letter.
Please do.
The letter is dated June 8th, 2017, regarding landmarking of the historic Nordhoff Grammar School. Dear Commissioners, I am writing to support the nomination of the historic Nordhoff Grammar School as a City of Ojai historical landmark. The beautiful Ojai Grammar School building may very well have come about because of the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Living near what is now Dodger Stadium, Roy Wilson, showing an interest in becoming a draftsman, was encouraged by his teachers to move to Berkeley and study the field of architecture. The great earthquake of 1906 would cut his education short, but instead would provide him with practical experience through the rebuilding of the great city. With additional training, talent, and education, Roy Wilson moved to Santa Paula in 1914, where he purchased 40 acres to develop homes surrounded by natural beauty. By 1920, he was designing the mansions and important buildings for most of Ventura County. By 1927, the Ojai Valley would be one of the lucky towns to brag on the beautiful and new modern school buildings designed by the famous architect Roy Wilson. The Nordhoff Grammar School was designed so that it could be enlarged without changing the design. The Ventura Free Press in 1927 commented, quote, "The Nordhoff Schoolhouse is spoken of in very complimentary terms by all alike." I recommend landmark status for this building as soon as possible. Thanking you in advance, I am David M. Mason. Thank you.
Thank you. Thane Whipple?
Thanks for opening this up for a public hearing. It's good to be here. Those of you who I know, I like very much. But I'm here for myself.
Please,
yes?
please state your name.
Yeah, Thane Whipple. Okay. I thought I did, but I'll keep saying it. Maybe it'll give me votes next time. I am a member of the school board, and I came tonight because I was elected to represent the interests of our school district. And I believe that making a landmark status on this property will limit what we can do for the children of this valley currently and into the future. I think that's bad for the school district. I know that every other trustee has publicly stated their opposition as well. And I was reading the instructions for landmarking a property on your website, and it says it's required that the property owner request it. I know that's not your position now, but that's what your website says. And the property owners have not requested it and don't want it. I love history. I love the fact that you're preserving history. My concerns are that what history was there was really lost over the years. The comments about Roy Wilson's architecture and the building that was built some 90 years ago, I think is very appropriate. But the building that stands there now is barely a shadow of itself. If you compare the old photos to what's there now, it's really a derelict of what it was. There were comments about the preschool building being an example of the Ojai section, which I think is factually incorrect. The Ojai section is a very specified architectural design, which I don't believe is embodied in that building at all. I think that there are many misrepresentations and factual errors in the report. I think that the statement that the date stamp wheel wasn't working is emblematic of a lot of what's going on with this process. The date stamp wheel doesn't explain the handwritten date of the 9th. And if you take a look, you'll see that although city staff claims that it was just an error, I think it was quite intentional. I think that there have been several intentional efforts to mislead you and mislead the public regarding the historical significance of the building. I think there's a difference between sentimentality and historical value. I think there's a difference between architectural preferences and historical value. And as much as I care about history, I have to say that I care more about the children and the future of the valley. And I think that anything that is done to impede the ability of the school district to care for the educational interests of the children of this valley is not in the best interest of the city. I believe that the people of the Ojai Valley and the city should be making the decision about what happens on that property going forward, not just a few people in a boardroom. And I think that if this moves forward, as much as I like history, I think it's a sad day for the future of Ojai. Edward Libby did not make Ojai what it is by preserving the cowboy town and the old school, the original schoolhouse that stood there from the 1890s. He made Ojai by looking towards the future. I think that we can preserve the architecture. I think we can preserve the feeling. I think we can preserve the property, whether we keep the buildings there, whether we modify the structures there. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Whipple. Elise Dupuy.
Good evening. Elise DePoit, Ojai.
I always mispronounce your name. Sorry.
I thought you did it well.
Okay.
Oh, you said DePuy. Yeah, it's DePoit. I think it's unfortunate that the school district is taking the stance that they are, because the Ojai Grammar School, Nordoff Grammar School is obviously, the buildings there are historic. And the architecture follows the pattern that began in 1916, converting the Spanish style of the town, and this building was converted in the 20s. The Crotona Institute, the Ojai Valley Inn, and on and on and on. The school follows the pattern of that development. And I appreciate the effort that was taken to go through and see all the discrepancies and point out the little things that weren't correct. But overall, if you look at the forest and not each little bit, the school buildings are historic, and everyone thinks they are. Even the people who aren't in favor of landmarking it believe they are historic in some senses. But what I feel like when they say that they don't want it landmarked so that people can have more freedom in what they would like to see there, I think it's just the opposite. I think the developers spending all this time on proposals would like to know that these buildings have been landmarked so they can know what they're working with, rather than spending all this time and money with all these plans and then having them to go before the council and the planning commission over and over again, saying no, that won't fit in. It's to me, it's backward. If they knew right where they stood right from the beginning, they could plan something that everybody could be happy with. And I don't understand why landmarking is a limiting factor, or would be a limiting factor. There's, as others have said, that you could do anything pretty much to the insides of the buildings, and there's all the other acreage on the property that you could do things with. So I don't really understand the opposition, and I don't understand why it would be limiting. And I understand that this commission and the city council, you have different jobs from the school district. So you have to keep in mind what yours is, and that is to preserve the historical buildings and structures of the city. That's your role. And it's too bad that it's different from what they perceive as their roles. Just a minute, I have to get my glasses. Thank you. There's just one more point I'd like to mention. And they all say, well, don't worry, don't worry. Nobody's going to be tearing them down or altering things terribly, but we still don't want them landmarked. I just don't, I just don't understand that idea, because it's like, if they're not going to be destroyed, then why don't we make them historic landmarks, and so everybody knows where they stand in the situation. So I support landmarking as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy Murphy?
Hi, I'm Judy Murphy, and excuse me, I've lived in Ojai now for 14 years. I'm here putting my 2 cents worth in for the first time, and I want
Welcome.
Thank you. I want to object to the historic designation of any part or all of the Chaparral property. And I'm basing that on the financial needs of our school district. You've all heard how the enrollment has declined, and there's been a lot of discussion about the probable need to eventually close one of our schools. I don't think that we should be further tying the hands of our school board financially at this point. I have been involved with the Ojai Valley Women's Club, which is a historical site in town, for several years now. And I want to tell you that in the last 10 years, we have put in over $100,000 trying to keep that building upright. Your auditorium, Chaparral, is in terrible condition. And I mean, the school board has obviously been spending money on the school children and not that building. But I just wonder, if it gets designated as a historic site, who's going to take care of it and put in all that money and effort that I know it will take, because I've been doing it at the Women's Club. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If there are no other public comments, I'm prepared. Oh, one more. Is this for this matter?
For this matter,
yes. Gina McCatton?
Hi, I'm Gina McCatton. I've lived in Ojai for 14 years. I live at 408 Drown. And I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I just found myself wincing every time the superintendent would speak about this is now no longer tile, it's now shingles, and this has been replaced, this is asphalt, and this corridor. All of these little changes that were made by previous school boards. They decided it was okay to change this, to change a roof, somebody made that decision. Somebody was not looking out for the historic significance of that building throughout time. So throughout the years, from whenever a change was made, when it took away from its value, from its historic significance, it was something that was made by the same, not the same body, but the same group of people that are saying now, don't worry about making it significant or preserving it, because we'll take care of it. Well, Mr. Whipple himself said it's barely recognizable. It's barely a shadow of itself, is the word he used. So if the people came before him, were the ones looking out for it, were the stewards, they obviously didn't do a very good job. So, I mean, no disrespect, but it doesn't seem to me that the people that are, the school board is looking out for the preservation of the building, which I'm sure that they have other things that are more important to their board. But this board, this commission, is to preserve Ojai. And so that seems to be important, to preserve something that does show the characteristics of our town. I think what brings people to Ojai is the look of the town. It is Azu, it is the building across the street, it is the arcade. I think that developers, I mean, I know I follow a lot of social media registrations all over, little towns all over this country. And I see building after building that attracts developers because of the fact that it's historic, because they know that people are going to drive in, not because it's a new building. I mean, we got a lot of those. But once history is gone, it's gone. And people come to Ojai to visit it because of its character. And so I'd like to think that we could take it back from the barely a shadow of itself to its former glory, possibly with a new developer in the future, possibly with whatever it takes to do it. But I don't think it will distract from developers. I think it will get the right developer and the right person for Ojai. So I would like you to consider landmarking the status. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. McClary?
Thank you, Chair McCready, members of the Historic Preservation Commission. As the city manager, I just want to, one, the staff reports to me, and I want to assure you that there has been no effort by the city staff to mislead the public or anybody in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please?
I haven't filled out a card. Do you want me to, or may I just speak?
Please approach. If you'll announce yourself, that'll be good.
My name is Cynthia Wyrick. I've been in Ojai for full-time for over 4 years. So I didn't go to school there. I don't own property, that is developed for any other reason. So anyway, I wasn't going to speak until I heard Mr. Whipple say that they might modify it or move it in a rather flippant way. I did go on a tour of the Chaparral School back in the summer. I think it may have been the first tour for this purpose. And a few school board members showed up there, including Mr. Whipple, and I had a conversation with him, and he didn't seem to know why he was there. I'm sorry, but he didn't. I mean, it was just like confusion. School board people were there because Superintendent Bankser, if I said his name right, was putting this property out for speculation. I don't really know, I don't really understand, but there has not been that much involvement in this school board with this process until very recently. And I mean, I know that because I talked to them. And I wasn't there, I just wanted to see it. I didn't have a position. After I saw it, I did have a position because I'm from the South, I've seen enough old buildings, I know how to look at bones, and that property is a historic building. And there are no children being schooled on that property. It's all offices, really nice offices for special education, this, that, and the other. But the campus, the sub-campus for children is not in that part that we're talking about. And I think there's some miscommunication going on here that's not quite honest. And this property needs to be saved. That's a huge piece of property that they can sell and divide up, but this front part needs to be saved. They can build a mall or whatever they want to, whatever the city says they can build, if it's approved in the other parts of the property. But this front part that's on Ojai Ave needs to be saved for the look of Ojai. And basically, I concur with everything that lady and that lady said.
Thank you. Will you do me a favor and before you leave, fill out a green card?
I will, right now.
You don't have to do it right now, but please approach.
Hi, my name is Jonas Svensson. I moved to Ojai 8 years ago from Stockholm, Sweden. And I just wanted to present myself because I don't know in this process that maybe I can be of some help. I represent, I think, one of 2 development groups that's been in talks with the school board over the last 3-4 years. And I represent a group of people who live here in Ojai who have been committed to spend up to $50 million renovating the Chaparral School into something that could be useful for the city. And I think that a lot of the discussions that are going on here, I don't think there's a conflict between preserving the historical integrity of that building. That's at least our intention in our group, and we're doing it because we think it's a very, very significant property. But I also think it's important that you don't hasten into a decision which makes it impossible for anybody to come in and actually preserve that building. Because if you make it a historic landmark and there will be no development interest in that building, I think the way that building looks today, and even if the school board vacates that building, it's not going to be looking historic. And there needs to be a lot of work and investment into that property for that property to look historic, even though it might be historic. So that's, I just wanted to say that. And if you ever want to contact me, I can give you my address and phone number. And if you want to hear a developer's perspective of this process and how we can be involved in that process. So,
Thank you. Will you do the same for me
I will
as,
do,
as well?
absolutely. Thanks.
Fill that out. With that, I will close the public comment period. I think we had a really good discussion here tonight. It was full on both sides. I'm really sensitive to the situation that the school district is in. I have a nephew who lives here in town, and he and his wife have 3 little girls, and they moved here 15 years ago because of the strength, for one reason, because of the strength of the schools, and their daughters my great nieces are now moving through the Miramonte School, Matilaha, and Nordhoff, and I understand the pride that this district takes in the schools and the town does, and I know it's a pillar of our community. And I think the commissioners here will agree with me that we want the school board and the funding for the schools to be healthy. And I don't think we are opposed to an intensified development on this site to achieve that goal. So we're not at cross purposes there at all. And that has to be clear tonight, once and for all. My goodness, we've had one of our landmarks turned into a bar. Secondly, I'd like to say that I have a pretty significant background in this kind of work. Prior to moving to Ojai, I worked for 2 large architecture firms for 29 years, working on large-scale master planning, multi-use projects, hospitality, and restoration and remodeling and additions to historic properties, including the Hotel del Coronado in Coronado, which is a property on the National Historic Register. And boy, there were developers really eager to work on that project, and we did significant changes to that building, including changing floor plans of entire wings of it, replacing fenestration, redoing restaurants, adding accessory buildings to the grounds that were within viewshed of the historic building. So secondarily, I would say that we on this commission do not see landmarking as an impediment to development at all. In fact, we see it as an asset to development. And so somehow people opposed to landmarking have gotten scared by developers who are saying that landmarking will throw sand into the gears of development. That's simply not true. You're not talking to the right developers. And there are whole teams of developers and investors and design professionals who do nothing but specialize in the rehabilitation and reuse of historic properties. So I think the fear needs to be taken out of that aspect of it. I would like to invite Commissioner Convery to talk about landmarking and what that means, because there seems to be a lot of fear around that particular aspect of it. So, Commissioner Convery?
I wanted to talk about what landmarking means as far as my experience and what the city of Ojai requires, but I also wanted to address some of the comments that came up tonight. So I'm not quite sure where to start. I think I want to just second Chairman McCready's comments that we are concerned about the financial aspects, and we do want to work hand in hand and, you know, have this be a positive conversation. And I think the fear factor really brings out a defensive posture. And if we can just dissolve that, I think that will help us to move forward in a much more respectful and positive way for everyone's economic benefit. And everyone is the city of Ojai and the Unified School District, because it really is about the two bodies working together. So I really want to talk about fear. So, the property is already listed as a historic site. It's number 5 on the listing of historic sites. That means anything that happens there, it comes in front of this committee. It doesn't matter if it's landmarked or not. It's going to come here. And that's really what, we've been discussing. I think that was not understood, that landmarking gives it a new layer of scrutiny, and it doesn't. Landmarking puts it into our consciousness, puts it back on a list of landmark sites. It gives it a plaque out in front so that the residents or visitors walk by and they stop and, instead of saying, what's this auditorium, what's that bell, there's a plaque out there that tells them, like at Twice Told Tales, like at the, Mr. Miley, thank you, like at Twice Told Tales and like the post office, people learn what the story is. And that's really what brings an economic benefit to the city of Ojai. I'm going to now read the purpose of Ordinance 675, which is listed in the resolution. Cultural and historic preservation. It's to promote the economic and general welfare of the city by preserving and protecting landmarks, monuments, and points of interest having a special historical or aesthetic character or interest in order to make the citizens of the city and visitors mindful of the historic, cultural, and natural heritage of the city. And that really brings, an economic benefit to the city of Ojai. So basically, the property is already a historic site. It's already going to come in front of the HPC, and landmarking will not add another layer of economic hardship, scrutiny, building permits, financial problems. It just won't do it. It's just not there. And that is misinformation that's been floating around here for 25 years. I restored 2 historic landmarks. I had no problems, and the value of the 2 properties I restored zoomed up because of the restoration. They're much more valuable. So to me, my experience is that it will increase the value for the school district in the long run. You're going to have a much more valuable property. That's just my experience, that's historic preservation experience. It's the experience in Pasadena and in other areas. I wanted to talk about some of the other buildings on the property because there were questions about, well, what about these back buildings that aren't historic? If the whole property is landmarked, do we have to jump through hoops to fix a roof on a Quonset hut? And there is a term that has never been used in this room, and it's called non-contributing. It's a very important preservation term. Those are non-contributing buildings. They don't contribute to the landmark or the historic elements of the property. Non-contributing buildings don't need to be considered for repairs. You can just repair them. You don't have to come here. You can tear them down. But if you build a new building, it has to be in keeping with the original structures, which increases the value of the property, which is good for the school district. So I just wanted to make sure that you understand the difference between a landmark building and a non-contributing building. It's not a drag onto the property. It's not going to hurt it. It just, the future buildings need to be compatible. And this is also a local landmark designation. It's not a state or a national designation. And that is a very important consideration because I did speak to one of the developers who's interested in the property, and I've known him for a long time. His hesitation with landmark status was that he would be hit with being required to have a certain architect, having special fees, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked him why he thought that. He told me he'd restored a historic property in another city in California. And he then confirmed it was a state-registered property and it was under Mills Act protection. So he had to spend an extra $40,000 just getting to approvals. So I told him the difference between state and local preservation. He doesn't have to hire a required architect, nothing. He was so happy to hear that. You know, he was like, wow, that's great. You know, that makes it much more interesting for me. And I'm very interested in keeping the look and the cohesiveness of the building. So just to let you know, that's coming straight out of a developer who's interested in this. It doesn't add into the cost factor, which I believe was the big hesitation, you know, as far as developers are concerned. There is no extra cost. I think, you know, I thought I had a lot more things to say, but apparently I've said them all. You know, hopefully I've resolved your fear, and I haven't had Mr. Summers interrupt me yet. He's going to.
I've been waiting. I will speak. I have a couple comments to make, but I didn't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead then and tell me what you think.
A couple of points of rather critical clarification. The first is that the structures of merit, also known as the sites of merit list, does not impose any additional requirements on properties. That's stated in 4813 subdivision B. Nothing in this chapter shall be construed to impose any regulation or control upon such structures to be added to such list. So that one point is incorrect. The second point that's incorrect, just again clarifying for the record, is that the current list of, quote, sites of merit that this commission is familiar with, as are some members of the public, is not a list of structures of merit under 4813, because that list was never approved by the City Council. The City Council has the power, upon the recommendation of this commission, to designate a structure of merit under 4813, but has not yet done so. And if the council acts to designate any one or more structures as a structure of merit under 4813, then that action still would not impose additional requirements on the property, including but not limited to a requirement to come to this commission. In short, the sites of merit is a list of properties that have been considered to be of some interest and of some historical value and appropriate for further evaluation, but doesn't impose land use requirements on top. However, you are very correct that even absent a landmark designation, redevelopment of the Chaparral School property in full would come before this commission through the CEQA process, as any redevelopment of that scale would almost assuredly require an EIR, which the Planning Commission, I would expect, would refer to this commission for evaluation of the historical aspects. Just want to make that clarification. Thank you.
Can you confirm that there are no historic building permit requirements vis-a-vis the City of Ojai and historic restoration? We don't have an extra layer of permits. Is that correct?
They apply only to landmark buildings. That is council-designated landmarks, not to the sites of merit.
That's
in those permit. The landmark, work on a landmark under the terms of the historic code requires a work permit from this commission.
So
but there's not a separate building permit.
So is there a permit if the property is landmarked? Will they have to pay an extra fee?
Yes, they will need to get a approval of a work permit from this commission.
For historic, just for historic property?
Just for designated landmarks.
Okay. And does the City Council have the discretion to waive the fee?
City Council has the discretion to waive any fee.
So if the school district came and said, we're the school district, you know, we have a very tight budget, would you allow us to waive the fee? That's a possibility.
Yes, the City Council would have the power to waive the fee in that case, and that would be up to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
I also wanted to clarify a little bit. There seems to be a considerable amount of confusion around the term lack of integrity. The fact that some of the buildings are missing their clay tile roofs and they have an asphalt shingle roof, that conveys a lack of integrity. But that doesn't mean that those clay tile roofs could not be returned, and then the integrity is returned. Incorrect windows could be replaced with correct windows, and then that's one less lack of integrity item on the list. So lack of integrity is a, if you will, technical term, but it doesn't mean that those things are irrevocable. So if one wished to, one could completely restore all the historical aspects of these buildings and go for California Registry or go for national. But at this point, it is only eligible for local landmarking with the exception of the auditorium and, happily for me, the kindergarten building, which I love. So I'll open it up to other commissioner comments.
Mr. Chairman, just one more point to make regarding the work permit process. A designation of landmark doesn't mean that a landmark designated structure cannot be altered.
That's true.
It can be altered, it can be added to, it can be modified. It just requires that, one, a work permit be secured from the commission, and two, that alteration be consistent with the characteristics that are designated in the landmarking ordinances and resolutions.
It's my expectation that any plans that the district might have would be a pretty serious intensification of the use of the site. And my goodness, at this point, according to my arithmetic, could be wrong, the historic buildings cover about 0.032% lot coverage, which is extremely low. So there's a good deal of open space that could be developed with other structures. And as Commissioner Convery said, the buildings, such as the maintenance buildings, which are clearly not historic, are simply non-contributors to the historic site. Commissioner Akins?
Yes. So I guess I should have these packets memorized. I have a pile of 5 inches high from all the different meetings we've held on this in the Smith-Hobson house. I was going through the packet today. I looked on attachment B, page 36 of 74. It's talking about Roy Wilson. It says Roy Wilson was the first licensed architect in Ventura County and designed hundreds of buildings in Ventura County, several which have been designated county landmarks. And then the key part. At least 4 of his school buildings have been designated Ventura County landmarks, including Hueneme Elementary School in Port Hueneme, Ventura County Landmark number 45, Timber Oaks School in Thousand Oaks, Ventura County Landmark number 166, and two schools in Santa Paula, Barbara Webster School, landmark Ventura County Landmark number 142, and Isbell Middle School, Ventura County Landmark 143. So I found that enlightening. I came and I watched the meeting between the school board and the city council. It's one that I had was happy to see. Through all these discussions, through my discussions with Superintendent Cantwell, through the different conversations that people have had, even different conversations that I've had here. First, before I continue, I was going to say this at the joint meeting where we had more school board members, but we weren't talking about anything historic, so I just kept my mouth shut, even though this didn't. Last year, when we were asking for the historic resources report from the Provenience Group, I was told by I think a prior staff member that that report was slow in getting to us because of issues in getting the information out of the school board. And I just want to say that throughout this year in dealing with Superintendent Bankster and with Superintendent Cantwell and also with Kathy Smith, that they have provided everything that I have requested. I think they have been responsive in the different needs of others. They have provided the tour. They have been receptive to the council, members of the council, myself, going and attending their school board meetings. But again, to those 3 individuals, the ones that I've dealt with, I thank them very much. They have been wonderful to deal with. So I just want to put that in there. So again, getting back to, you know, and I think this has come up in discussions, I think my responsibility here as a Historic Preservation Commission member is to look at something that possibly is historic and look at it with blinders on and say, is this a historic building? Is this a historic structure? My job isn't to, and so that's what I've attempted to do. You know, I've read the papers. I have copies of the newspapers where they talked about the 2 proposals. I am by profession a chief financial officer. That means I've done proposals, I've done business plans, operating plans, profit plans, read through contracts. I mean, if I were going to look at this outside the Historic Preservation Commission, I would think that the request that's being made of us to the Historic Preservation to wait and not do our job because of all these other things, I would be, just from an outside person looking in, I would be a bit appalled. Because as I whispered to Steve Quillisi at that meeting, he and I both have an aerospace background. If I waited to plan my budgets, my annual budgets for the year until a contract came in, I'd be out of a job, as I should be. And to a degree, it seems like, again, outside of the HPC, like we're being asked to do certain things based on incomplete information. For whatever reason, it's just something that I'm not aware of. So again, blinders on. Looking at this as a historic structure, I've told people I'm not a resident of the city of Ojai. My kids, I live in Oakview, just beyond Devil's Gulch. Therefore, I'm in the Ventura Unified School District. My kids grew up with the kids from Ojai. There were people who would have loved to see my sports-playing son go to Nordhoff rather than Ventura, but both of my kids went to Ventura Unified School District, graduated from there. But I do have a familial presence here. My father-in-law was born in Fillmore in 1925. They then moved down to La Jolla. They came back to Ojai because he had respiratory problems. So he went to Nordhoff Grammar School. I was reading through the different things on where the kindergarten rooms were, when they were there. I can imagine him going into, I believe, classrooms 4 and 5 as a kid. I wish my father-in-law was still here. He passed away in 1984. If he was still here at the age of 92, I would walk him over to the Nordhoff Grammar School, now Chaparral School, and we would walk through his life, because I'm sure that he would recognize all these years later, the classrooms that he had been in, the experiences that he had, possibly him having to walk across the street to go to the women's club, and interesting to note, meet in their dining room. So, it seems like when we were going through the lawyerly details of Superintendent Cantwell's point-by-point think that that it was a bit selective, in my opinion. We're talking about Ethel Percy Andrus. There is one place in here that talks about, and we had this discussion on whether associated in some other word, whether they were the same word to me, the non-attorney person, or not the same. All through this document, it talks about Ethel Percy Andrus in multiple places, not just at one place, and being associated with teachers who volunteered to come over to be tutors at the school. I didn't know Ethel Percy Andrus. I know Craig knows her far better than I do, being the specialist for the Museum for Ethel Percy Andrus. I have done an oral history with her attorney, but that gave me a little insight. But I can't imagine a woman like that, as on the ball as she was, not coming over to the Nordhoff Grammar School to check out the school, to check out the facilities, to check out the interaction with the people before she would send one of her highly prized retired teachers over to help tutor. I just find that hard to believe in all the information that I've seen since Craig did the wonderful job in bringing Ethel Percy Andrus, founder of AARP. I like to point that out wherever I go in the United States. Every time that commercial pops up, said that's us. So, again, the point is, too, in the Smith-Hobson house that the city just landmarked, there were 4 of the 11 items that were called out. You only have to have one. I thought one was, I'm like, one, man, that's a pretty easy bar. But again, reading through everything up till 3 o'clock last night, and then again at 7:30 this morning, the one is a bar both at the state level and at the federal level. So we have a 1. So one of the 11 things, Smith-Hobson, the Provenience Group, which we asked to give us information, had 4 items out of 11. On the Nordhoff Grammar School, they had 10 items out of 11. Okay, 2 people doing the same thing. Why did we ask for a historical report on the Nordhoff Grammar School? We were given the funding by the city council, thank you very much. We went out, we looked for 2 places that we thought had a historic nature, and we wanted to find out if in fact that was true. I've told people countless times that the reason we did the Nordhoff Grammar School was so that if people came to me or came to any of the commissioners and said, so what's so historic about it, we wouldn't look like we were stupid. Because, you know, again, I learned for the 3rd time all of the different peculiarities, all the different items that were related to the building of the Nordhoff Grammar School, and Roy Wilson, who stayed with it for it looked like at least 20 years through multiple adjustments, multiple improvements, but still remaining the same characteristics. Lost my train of thought, but I look at the structure, I walk the structure, I read the structure. Someone was saying that it's highly unrecognizable. Most people that know me know I collect all things Ojai, all things Ojai. I think I have 300 postcards on Wheeler Springs. I have postcards on Nordhoff Grammar School. Postcards were just amazing during that time frame. If you look at that postcard, if I take that postcard and I take that postcard over to the Nordhoff Grammar School, now Chaparral School, I can hold that up, and I can match that to the different locations. If you look through the documents that are in here, you can match that up to the different locations. You can go to the west side of the building. You can look at what new window, the one new window that was placed, the one new window that was covered up with the addition of the superintendent's quarters, but you can see that that's there. So to me, the integrity, along with the other thing, interesting in notes, we keep saying, well, it's not eligible for the federal, it's not eligible for the state, but if you look through the report, if you look at the 4 different things that make it eligible without going into the integrity part, and I'll leave that up to Darwin, it qualified for both the federal and the state, federal, state, but then it went to the integrity. Again, I'll leave that up to Darwin. So it wasn't that it was wildly not in agreement with the national, with the federal and the state standards. It came down to just those little things that Darwin will understand long before I could even imagine it on the integrity of the building. So again, I see our job as having blinders on, looking at this building, looking at these buildings, looking at these grounds, and looking, is this historically important to the community of Ojai? And I am all things historic. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm on the Ojai Valley Museum, and that's why I go out and attend school boards and other meetings. So,
Commissioner Quinn?
Well, thank you, and I'd like to thank everyone for all of their comments. So I would like to say that I have landmarked and own 2 properties in Ojai. I truly believe in preserving the history of this town. I think without it, it wouldn't be Ojai. We do need to preserve our history, but I'm having a little bit of trouble making a decision to do it over the objections of the property owner. So the historicalness, if there is such a word, of this grammar school is very important. It sits in a prominent place on Ojai Avenue. And if it were gone, I would say, well, would that make a big difference? And the answer is yes, it would make a very large difference. But I don't hear anyone saying they want to take it down. But another thing that I did in my life besides landmarking 2 properties was my husband and I owned a civil engineering firm in Torrance. And a lot of the developers we worked for bought up unused school sites. And what did they do? They tore down all the buildings and built housing. I would absolutely not be in favor of that. And so I'm a little bit torn here. As I listened to the comments, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, but as she was talking about whether the school board has been a good custodian of that property or not, in my walkabout that I did this week with my husband, what I saw was an awful lot of deferred maintenance. I saw the changes that we've all been talking about here that were not really thought about when they were being made, of what is this doing visually to a property that now I'm speaking as a school board, utilizing. Has this enhanced the property, or am I letting this property deteriorate? So I do have doubts about saying, let's wait on this, as you've asked. But on the other hand, personal property rights are very important to me. And I wouldn't like us to be just going around saying, should be landmarked, this should be landmarked, and so on. But I see my job here is very important, so that's where I stand.
Thank you. Commissioner Convery?
Thank you. I'd like to respond to that. I agree with personal property rights and their value, but in the case of the Ojai School District, it's owned by the Ojai School District, and the voices in the Ojai School District, the board, the employees, et cetera, change. Right. They've changed and changed and changed, and different boards vote to put asphalt on rather than tile, for economic reasons. They're all good reasons. I'm not questioning the decisions. Things happen, but the owners do change, and it's our job, as Commissioner Akins said, to recognize a historic property. It's in the heart of downtown. It defines the character of that end of the arcade. It really is a landmark piece, and as the school board changes, we don't know who's going to come in. We don't know what's going to happen there. So I see our job is to protect the integrity and the economic viability of the town, because Ojai is based on a tourist income, which is about what it looks like and what it offers, and that's a huge responsibility. So there is a little more detail to the ownership question. It's not one person. It's a body that changes all the time. It's tricky.
Commissioner Akins?
One other thing, again, looking with my blinders, trying to delineate what I see as my responsibility as a historic preservation commissioner, and I think I've laid that out. But, I'm not just living in my own bubble. I realize that our responsibility is to promote or not promote, make a proposal or suggest landmarking or not suggesting. We then make that to the city council. So I recognize that all of the things outside of what we've talked about as historic preservation commissioners are the purview, the responsibility of the city council. And so I noticed that 2 of them are here tonight. I'm sure the other 3 will watch on the YouTube channel and see, but again, looking purely at my responsibilities as a historic preservation commissioner, not looking at my responsibilities as, an assistant city council person. That's not my job. Thank you.
So, prior to opening it up for a motion, I do think it's important to stress, at least one more time, to wind it back to one of our jobs being to demystify what landmarking means and to take the fear out of it. And somehow there's been a lot of fear being spread about what landmarking means and what it really means. And so we hope that we've come a little bit of ways towards dispelling some of that fear tonight. So with that, I'll open it up for a motion.
I make a motion that we adopt the resolution to landmark the property.
I'll second that for discussion purposes. So,
Mr. Winiger?
For discussion, yeah. Well, my question again gets back to, and it wasn't completely answered, but I didn't want to follow it up, but I do now. So, are we able to landmark the entire property, or do we have restrictions on what we can landmark tonight? Thank you.
The commission could landmark some, all, or none, of course, of the property should the commission find that the record supports concluding that the identified elements in the landmark, as the commission would decide, meet the listed criteria, to repackage that in a perhaps more understandable fashion. If the commission finds that the buildings designed by Roy Wilson and the buildings designed by Maynard Linden are of sufficient value and of, not to quote all the 11 criteria, but meet the 11 criteria, or most of the 11 criteria, as the commission so finds, then you can landmark those buildings. You could also landmark the property with the character defining elements being those buildings, the Roy Wilson buildings, the Maynard Linden buildings, and mindful of Commissioner Convery's comments, expressly excluding the non-contributing elements, the, for lack of a better word, the bus barn and the public works type public yard things at the back of the property. So you can structure it that way.
Do you want to clarify?
If by
Do you want to clarify your resolution?
Thank you.
What do you mean?
Do you want some more specifics, maybe?
I make a motion that we adopt the resolution as written to landmark the entire property because the non-contributing buildings won't be affected by this landmark. Only the character-defining buildings will be affected.
Okay.
So I would like to adopt the resolution as written.
Do I have a second?
I did second it.
Okay. Mr. Winiger?
Commissioner Convery,
Yes.
Vice Chair Akins,
Yes.
Commissioner Quinn,
Yes.
Chair McCready.
Yes.
Motion carries. This item will be scheduled for a public hearing before the City Council.
Thank you. Commissioner Akins?
Yeah, just one question, one thing. Again, I'm trying to keep openness and clarifications as much as possible. So we are making a recommendation to the City Council. Can you explain to me the right of appeal of our recommendation?
Happy to. Under 4808 of the code, your recommendation will be passed to the City Council, embodied in the resolution just adopted, and accompanied by a report to the City Council that will contain the information specified in 4808. Then, once it gets to the City Council, the council will consider the landmark. The steps between now and then are within 7 days from today. That resolution and report will be forwarded to the property owner, care of Mr. Cantwell as superintendent. And the property owner has up to 30 days to file, again, counting from today, to file an objection, a formal written objection to the designation of landmark status. If the property owner does so, then the City Council's consideration of the matter under 4809 will be in another notice to public hearing. If the property owner fails to file such written objection, the City Council still considers the matter, but just as a discussion item, not as a notice to public hearing. And again, that's governed by 4808 and 4809. Based on the commentary tonight, I would expect a written objection.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. With that, we move to item 3 on our agenda tonight, Historic Preservation Commission, Annual Historic Preservation Award for 2017. Mr. Winiger.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At your previous meeting, the commission had discussion regarding possible candidates for recognition for the Annual Historic Preservation Award. At that point, the commission suggested that the Taramina community, who promoted the designation of that community as the city's first historic district, be recognized. I want to acknowledge and thank Vice Chair Akins, who prepared the supporting documentation that you have, attachment A there, for inclusion in providing the justification for the nomination. So with that, I'd offer Commissioner or Vice Chair Akins to make any comments regarding that nomination narrative.
Commissioner Akins?
Okay, so I volunteered to do this. Basically, it is going through looking at the different meetings that we held, the different actions that took place, and also taking information from Ms. Vachey's fine book on Taramina, or Helene Vachey, I thought that was her first name, just wanted to make sure. Her fine book on Taramina that came out earlier this year. maybe late last year. Anyway, it's wonderful. It was hard to just pick out a few key points. The book is so informative and fascinating. But again, I wanted to give a little bit of initial history onto the Taormina community, and then I was giving a selection of six different criteria on which we were awarding this. And I thought criteria number 6, grassroots organizational efforts in historic preservation, summed up the Taormina community perfectly.
Thank you, Commissioner Akins.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Akins. As your staff report notes, this will go to council on November 18th for ratification of your nomination and a formal presentation at their December 12th meeting.
Thank you. And that concludes that item.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. There's no action. So item 4, Ojai Day. Again, this year we will be holding the historic Ojai Jail open on Ojai Day, starting at 10, ending at 4 o'clock, I believe. And Mr. Barrows has graciously accepted our invitation for him to provide his Edsel police car there for the delight of the little ones. And I would like to encourage our commissioners to block out part of their day that day to be there, and I'll bring the cookies. So
10 to 4, you said?
I think it is 10 to 4.
I believe so.
Yes.
And Mr. Chairman, just for additional information, I'm happy to report the jail has been cleaned and bombed for spiders and other vermin. And I have here the key to the facility, which I will give to the chair. It contains all the supporting materials that you need, your directional signs and what have you, as well as the list of information that's provided in your staff report, flashlights, easels, what have you. So.
Okay.
It was a guest just a couple of years ago who pointed out to me that there was a big black widow spider that was camping right behind where the fans were that we were having people pull out and take with them. So we waited until the jail was cleared and then took the broom in and just
took care of it.
Well,
sent them on their way to heaven.
I want to acknowledge and thank the Public Works Department.
Yes,
they actually came over and personally assured us that that was.
I know one year Commissioner Akins had to clean it, so.
Spooky.
So item 5, Mr. Winiger, future agenda items?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The only item we have scheduled right now for your next meeting is Taormina Historic District signage. I want to, again, acknowledge Vice Chair Akins for helping facilitate that. I can report that we've gotten some bids for the fabrication, and hopefully they're providing, we requested, and hopefully they'll provide a mock-up that we can bring to you for your approval so that they can get that installed in short order.
Okay.
A quick point. Again, for people that are watching us, there were some placement issues we had to be aware of because we can't put public signs on private properties, and you have a couple corners there that it might be kind of tight on that requirement. So
yes,
thank you, Mr. Winiger.
You're welcome. And as you indicated, Taormina community is made up of private streets, so we have to be working on where they intersect with public streets to be able to facilitate the installation of those signs. So. That's all as I think was acknowledged earlier this evening, the City Council did approve the designation of this structure as the city's latest landmark. As the Commission knows, though, the character-defining features include interior elements such as the fireplace in both the conference room and here, the built-in buffet and cabinets, the ceiling beams and what have you. So any alterations that the city may consider in the future, if they affect any of those elements or the exterior elements that are acknowledged, would come before the Commission via the work permit requirement established in the city code.
Thank you.
I have a possible future agenda item I'd like to suggest. I think we should consider restoring this room. It's really awful. I mean, we're supposed to be making aesthetic decisions, and Libby's premise was that people make better decisions when they're in better-looking environments, essentially. Craig could word it exactly, but it's really hard to make great decisions when you're in an environment that's challenging. But I think it would certainly add value to the city's property.
I know that the council has discussed specifically the lighting issue, and there's some concerns about the pictures and how they're...
The whole room needs work.
But and because it does serve as part of the gallery for the art exhibits, it's something that not only would the Historic Preservation Commission review, but so would the Arts Commission. But I know there's discussions about possible improvements in the future.
Just questioning the art. The art moves around. It's not fixed.
Correct.
So the Arts Commission, that as far as restoring the room, I'm talking about the varnish, the lights, the floors, the restoration, which wouldn't affect anything with the Arts Commission.
It would not.
Okay, good.
Councilman Haney?
If I could make one comment while Councilman Haney is walking to the microphone. Just a further minor clarification. We understand there's some slight confusion among members of the public on the landmarking for Chaparral School item. The Chaparral School is number 5 on that non-official Sites of Merit list, but not landmark number 5. It, of course, is not yet landmarked. Just a further clarification. Thank you.
Mr. Haney?
Well, folks, great job.
Thank you.
A lot of hard work. It's a lot of preparation. It's a lot of reading. That was one of my questions, was the historic site that, is it Commissioner? It's interesting. Do we call it Commissioner? Commissioners?
Convery?
But, no, I know Cynthia's name, but it was interesting. I always get caught up sometimes in, is it Commissioner woman? Is it Commission? But it's Commissioner, so we're fine.
Commissioner.
I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, Matt. That was a concern of mine. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't misrepresent what it is, because it is a site of merit. It's not a historical landmark as of yet, but it's heading in that direction, I sense. Okay.
Can I let you know that on our city website it says historic sites? So it's called historic on the cityofojai.org. Just saying.
Right. So again, the clarification of that, so it's not misunderstood, is it's a historic site on the site of merit, but that has technically no meaning. And there would not be anything that anyone would have to do to bring it to this at this state under that heading. What I found interesting in all the discussion, how do we get, every time I'm involved in one of these, there's so much history given about this community. How do we disseminate that? How do we get this, this pamphlet on all the history of this site and put it up on our website or put it up on HPC's website? I don't think we have one, but you know what I'm saying? How do we get this stuff out there? Because it's so valuable, so valuable.
There's a key component right there in the front row, because one of the ways of doing that, and it was nice to see it cited all the way through here, was going to the website, which is put out by the museum. Thank you for your support, for ojaihistory.com. You'll see that, and Craig Walker, after I think Richard Hoy did it, and then you picked up and put a lot of articles that were up there. Am I correct, Craig?
Right.
So
I think an important point is these packets that you get. A lot of times I even go online and find those packets from other cities where they talk about their landmarks, because it gets so much history, and it would be good if the museum would take those packets, or the city of Ojai would take those packets.
So again, to answer your question, Donna has her hand up. The museum is doing that. They're collecting the historical reports. And I agree with the value. The value to me is having those packets, which is why David Mason, when he was here and knew everything, without opening the packet, would just hand it to me.
Well, I
would devalue it.
And I still think also that we should publish it, at least on a short term, on our own city website.
That's a wonderful idea.
And then at that point in time, turn it to the museum and say, keep it for our records. We just need it.
Yeah,
that's the other thing I found interesting was the first school built in 1870, and then eventually torn down. And more importantly, additionally added to and moved and added to and added to. I thought that was real interesting. But more importantly is it was torn down. So obviously, there was no historic preservation back in the day, whereas today, we need to be grateful for the fact that there is. And that's the difference between then and now, is that we do have groups of people in all of our communities, not just in this one, that recognize the value of the historical sites and preserving them for not just for today, but for the future. So it's real interesting how that's evolved.
Randy, to add to your comment, I mean, I think the fact that Ojai has a Historic Preservation Commission, and in here, I think it came about 26 years ago. I know David was on that when it started. And you read, like, in preparation, I was reading Los Angeles Conservancy, and they were listing the very few communities that had historic preservation commissions.
Right.
So kudos to the city of Ojai
Right.
for having this commission and supporting this commission and giving us the independence to make the recommendation to you, because I'm sure that's what you want. You want us to act on our own merits, not with the outside influences, and get to you what we feel is the truth. So,
And again,
so again,
just-
kudos to the city of Ojai
Right, to the
for
community.
having. Well, the
Because most of
community
these things are community-driven, so I agree with you 100%.
and to the council.
Okay,
and the
so
staff.
I will close with this. I've never seen the buffet work. And I have not had dinner. So when I heard buffet, I went, we have a buffet in Ojai.
Amen.
Coming to a restaurant soon, or near you. And I'll close with that. Just other than, just a great job, a difficult discussion. You all handled it well. I believe the school board handled it well. And it'll come to us for another discussion and another opportunity to view it. So thank you all.
Thank you, Councilman Haney. I have a question for Mr. Winiger about our vacancy.
Yes.
We have someone who's interested.
Yes, and I believe nomination, or,
Even if they're closed, I'm sure they could be reopened. Gail Davis would be the person to send it.
yeah, she should contact
Okay.
the records clerk, Gail Davis. I
Okay.
believe they were still accepting applications.
Okay.
And I believe the application, I believe, is also online somewhere on the city's website.
Okay.
I think under openings, commission openings. I have one other question before. you
Commissioner
bring up
Akins?
Gail. Okay, so looking forward to future agenda items. I want to go back to what Don said. Thank you, gentlemen, your wife. So Don, you were talking about the Boyd Center, and you mentioned two items that to look at possibly as for historical. What, just the Boyd Club? Okay. So.
Please.
I had mentioned the Boyd Club, but also in the delivery of the discussion on the Chaparral, I'm wondering if there should be an evaluation of the downtown area also as a historic landscape for Ojai.
Is it
So I didn't
historic
specifically
district?
call that historic district,
Yeah.
and/or we're looking at the historic landscape or the cultural landscape, exactly what we're talking about tonight, and the grammar school, how it fits within that district, so that we're not making changes to, I mean, if you look at the images of 1917 Ojai, it was commented on when we had the poster for Ojai Day. Except for the cars changing, we look like we did 100 years ago. And we really need to take steps to make sure that that doesn't change. If Ojai wants to continue to be Ojai, you know, we need to make sure the streets don't become lined with trees in the middle and we can't see our buildings anymore. We can't see Topa Topa anymore. Again, the look of Ojai, really, I think we need to kind of step up and take a look at Ojai in general, and whether or not downtown, from where the St. Thomas Aquinas Chapel starts, where the museum is, all the way down to Chaparral, we have structures that are over 100 years old. And that look and those buildings deserve preserving, so thank you. Up to the AT&T building, South
Thank you.
Blanche.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.
Gina? That was Gail Davis, who was just right behind you.
Gail is going to bring you an application.
Oh.
That was Gail.
I did that like, I don't know, 9 months ago, whenever it first got this property ownership. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. It's good. It just depends on who's running it. And it down the city, because it could devalue the city if we had some fruitcakes on it.
No, I was just thinking, the board that, PRC, I was just thinking at the same time.
We don't have the money.